Hello everyone. Welcome to my first time ever virtual SauceCon session. My name is Tony Zhang. We will be hanging out in the next 25 minutes. A little bit about myself. I'm a mobile SDET at Dual Security. I also work as a UX researcher trying to bring up the design ideas at the very earlier stage to reduce the end user error. I have been dealing with the mobile automation in native and cross-platform frameworks for about 6 years. Have exposed to different CI services, different combinations of devices to stabilize the testing strategy. So today, I will share some of the experiences I have learned along the way. So, a few ground rules. You might have trouble making decisions, like what design patterns should follow, what should we start with, simulators, emulators, real devices, etc. Hopefully, my opinions today can help you to make informed decisions. And also encourage new ideas for the team involvement. Some of the key takeaways from my session today: why locators are essential in automation, which frameworks is the best fit to your organization, page object versus screenplay, and many more. I will briefly talk about the 6 phases of mobile automation lifecycle. You might not be in the process from the very beginning like the Inception, or your environment has pretty much everything settled. But often, you might think of optimizing some of the current process, like stabilization, maintenance. Then you can pick that up which step you would like to investigate more time and apply the changes to fit your organization. I bet you see this image a million times. Testing pyramid? Again? You know what? It looks like a triangle to me. Definitely not a pyramid. But peace mind. We're not talking about shapes. And we're not talking about how to draw a pyramid or triangle. I believe there are hundreds of different versions of it. The main focus of today's topic is on the top, the UI automation on mobile. I don't want to disappoint you that when you sit and listen for 20 minutes and wonder why this guy doesn't even talk about anything like unit test yet, because I won't. I bet several sessions out there today talking about test strategy of how to optimize your method and boost your test coverage, when and how to write a unit test, integration test. Mine today, UI automation. Alrighty, let's begin with the first and foremost part, Inception. So before I jump into the locators, I would like to talk a little bit about the textability. Textability is not about the ability to automate. Totally different things. Automation exists to support our testing efforts. Textability is the foundation of any of your test strategy. It should be on the bottom of a pyramid, below the unit tests. Then, how to improve the textability? Clean codes? Well-designed function will include its own unit tests, or not testing implicitly. It can involve many areas, but consistent element naming is always a number in the top list, especially for the better UI automation. So let's go back to the locators now. Sometime we call the identifier in iOS, or resource ID in Android, or XPath or something else in Appium. Locators are essential. Consistent naming conventions for both variables and its underlying locators are the key part. So let's think about tapping a menu button on a mobile, like the burger icon you can see on the screen. And the action to tap the burger icon is quite similar across both iOS and Android. If you have consistent locators for that element, it will make some of the scripts reusable, hence increase textability. For people who are using the cross-platform framework like Appium, locators couldn't be more important. They rely heavily on the consistent element identifiers. Otherwise, it will be pointless, right, to have 2 sets of scripts in a cross-platform text with just testing a similar action. Let's take maybe another similar example for settings. For Android, click the burger icon. It will normally have an overflow menu. As you can see on the top of the screen, the settings and help can pop up. And this type of views are not equally easy to test if you are adopting the Android default overflow. Same thing for the preferences or settings activities. As you can see, the two elements have the identical resource ID, title. We can use test to locate the element for sure, but that's the least things you want to do, right? You don't want to refactor the names whenever the dev changes string. In this case, you might want to talk back with your dev team to customize the view instead to have a unique locator. So, what's the takeaway? If you have a separated platform-specific team, get the whole mobile team buy-in for consistent locator naming for a similar action button. Otherwise, it will be you to clean up the mess later down the road. Plan. There are tons of things you can think about in plan. Device metrics, exit criteria, gathering requirements, but we will focus on the frameworks today. Native framework or cross-platform framework. Just to be clear, there's no right or wrong answer here. There are many places and areas that your team can focus on to choose between native and a cross-platform framework like Appium. Resources for one thing. Do you have the dev support for writing the tests, or just yourself working on it? Technical skills. To be specific, language support. Appium support all the WebDriver compatible languages, which means you can write Java, JavaScript, Python, Ruby, anything you prefer. Reviewing. Resources for reviewing our code. I know the platform-specific team normally will like to review your code in a native way, which means you might need to write a test in Java, Kotlin, Objective-C, or Swift. Codebase. Native framework is embedded as part of your codebase repo, but cross-platform framework might need a third repo to sync between codebases. But you may think keep one codebase for your text automation isn't a bad idea. But later on, you also need to think more about the continuous integration process. Since most cross-platform framework, you have to pull the dev codes, build your apps, and run the tests. Black box versus white box. Native framework normally come with a white box, or maybe gray box. They fully or partially support a production API, which give you a more flexible way to mock the object and prepare the testing state. Speed level. I would say native framework normally have a faster way versus cross-platform framework because the cross-platform framework have additional layer to run. Last but definitely not least, does your app have a similar user flow? If you have two different user flow in iOS and Android, you will need to write two sets of scripts anyway. The one script for two platforms isn't an advantage anymore. So if you have a required skills and dev support, I would say native framework would be your choice to have a better overall experience. Development. I will talk a little bit about architecture and underlying patterns. And page object, screenplay, combination of two or others is really up to you. The most patterns you're familiar with, you can try it out. If you are coming from a Selenium world, then the page object is pretty much in your arsenal to start with. Since Appium is on top of the Selenium, so it will be a seamless transition for you to adopt a page object. Page object provides a simple, easy to understand architecture and low barrier to entry. You can think about in a practical way. Any patterns is easy for you to help others to understand, that's a good one to try. For Espresso in Java, that's also totally fine in most cases by using page object. I started using page object with XUI test in Swift years back. But I noticed that we also need to adapt to the language by its nature. Swift is a protocol-oriented language. Traditional page object might not fit quite well. So later on, I refactored the architecture by adopting more protocols, extensions into the steps definition. So now it's more like screenplay. Screenplay is aiming the issues of page object for scalability. Since screenplay satisfies the single responsibility principle, traditional page object method will be redefined as actions and then split it up into the multiple objects for better scale. So, if scalability matters more to you, screenplay might be over page object for your projects. But I'm not saying, okay, IPM page object, XUI test, screenplay, espresso, page object. Either patterns actually works pretty well as long as you and your team can easily understand and start contributing. Stabilize your test. So how to stabilize your test? You test. Simulator and emulator are good for most of the time. I would say 90% of the time for debugging, you can easily find a bug through look and feel. And now, the developer features provide us a toolset to simulate the biometrics, geolocation, network, even push notifications. However, if any of the simulated scenarios is a revenue-driven feature, I would recommend you to at very least test on the real devices. That being said, validation on devices is expensive. Only consider that if critical features need to be verified. And it's also essential for the performance testing on real devices. But if you want your environment always on, maintain all the OS combinations, let alone the Android world, just iOS itself will be tough to maintain. So you may think, maybe device farm? Is that the future? I would say yes in my opinion. But for now, it still depends on your environment setup, resources you have. Device farm integration normally will fall into the DevOps plate, so you might need their support. Before jumping to the large-scale device testing, maybe you start from a couple of devices on-premise. There are several services providers out there like TextObject by Sauce Labs, AWS Device Farm, Firebase Text Lab. I will give you some services while we work with them. TextObject, they need both text runner and APK or IPA file to start a test. So you need to find a way to build the text runner and app as part of your CI pipeline to feed the API request. AWS Device Farm has a good integration with Jenkins, but you might still need to use the CLI, the command line interface. It's not quite intuitive to use for junior QA engineer. So the bottom line is, it's still up to you to find the right balance of the simulator and the device-based testing to support your quality standards throughout the continuous integration and deployment. Speaking of the continuous integration and deployment, we will move on for this topic, CI/CD and long-term maintenance. So, what can CI/CD provide you? It can reduce the release cycle. If you have a commit level validation, for instance, whenever you have a commit, your CI pipeline will be triggered to run the audit scan, unit tests, and UI automation tests. You can also have a nightly build scheduled for larger scale combinations in UI automation tests, since it will take more time to run. If you have additional layer of screenshot validation with some services like Aptitudes, that's even better. All of them can gain the confidence for you before you release your app to the App Store. CI pipelines are also easy for dev and quality to track the data, not just manager things anymore in the morning to inform you that's something you have to follow. Which means CI pipeline can provide fast feedback. It can also reduce the flakiness. You can set the retry mode to feed accumulated data chart, and later on to see the trend to locate the flaky tests, and many more features. But bottom line is, the CI system should be easy to maintain. If you have a designated built-in tools team or DevOps team, that's good. But if you don't, easy to maintain will be something you like to consider. You don't want to bother anyone to make small changes for just debugging. So, you may ask, how to implement a CI/CD with native testing framework? Actually, it's relatively easy to set up. Maybe some plugin in Jenkins, or some bash scripts to run the preparation for the tests. Fastlane, Gradle, Xcode build, etc. There are many ways for them to integrate your project into the existing CI pipeline. Then, how to do it in cross-platform framework? I will give you an example of what the phase-by-phase design process looks like to implement a continuous integration for IPM project. It may not be the case for you, but hopefully it will give you some ideas how to set it up. Phase 1. Instead of running a test locally, you may think about uploading your mobile artifact to somewhere secure, and also have an IPM server running on. SauceLab secure location might be a best choice. Create a CI pipeline for IPM repo that will run the tests, and pointing at the location of the artifact in SauceLabs. You may also require building a Docker image that contains everything needed to run those tests. This pipeline could be manually triggered whenever we know there's a new artifact to test. Phase 2. Automate the uploading part. Created a CI pipeline for Android and iOS repo that would build and create a mobile artifact. It would then get uploaded to SauceLabs automatically, or any location you choose. Phase 3. Decoupling. For the IPM pipeline, use Docker Compose to spin up a Docker image containing an IPM server with the Android and iOS emulator or simulator, an additional container for running the tests. Phase 4 is optional, but it can make the whole process automated. Whenever the Android and iOS repo pipeline get updated, so that after the image has been created and saved, either as an artifact in your CI or up in the SauceLabs, the IPM pipeline would automatically get triggered so that the test get run. Okay, last part, maintenance. You need maintenance. There's no other way around, because UI automation will have flakiness, period. It depends on many external factors, devices, resources, network, you name it. Any piece can easily break your test. You also need to improve the API regularly. For instance, previously, XUI test has something called wait for existence. It returns a true or false boolean to verify the element. And now they have a better wait for API in their framework. It returns a weighted result, an enum representing the result of the tests. It can be one of those possible values like completed, timeout, incorrect orders, and only completed indicates that the element was successfully found within a timeout. You may also want to add the same thing in Android, such as inserting a check is display as a transition safeguard in Espresso. Or you may also think about introducing the UI Automator 2 framework to add additional layer to wait for step. You may want to follow every release notes from the frameworks as well as the IDE, like Espresso and Xcode. Anything you can think about that could break your test. So you can make preparations upfront to have your test framework robust. I think that's pretty much all I have for today's topic. And happy testing! And you are watching this at home You are doing your part to flatten the curve. And thank you so much for listening. And please, please stay safe.